Victor, as many of you will know, is a former Guardian journalist, and he's a historian, poet, and a prolific author with his latest book called Vic Keegan's Lost London. He's been on the Thorney Island Committee now for many years and runs our Twitter account. And he also chairs the Royal Park Safety Committee on our behalf. So we're delighted that Victor has volunteered to do this talk for us this evening.
Okay, well, thank you very much and welcome to the Thorney Island Society and Friends of St James's Park and the Green Park. And thank you all for coming out on a warm evening like this. One of the things I like about being a member of the Thorney Island Society is because of our nature, we get access to buildings that are not normally open to the public. And I remember now must be a couple of years ago, we were shown around the Houses of Parliament by an official guide, and we saw the Speaker's private accommodation, which you wouldn't normally see. And it's very interesting. And after a while, when it's getting a bit quieter, the official House of Commons guide took me aside and whispered in my ear. He said, "Excuse me, I hope you don't mind me asking this question, but where exactly is Thorney Island?" So I sort of was nonplussed for a moment. Then I said, "Here, you're on it." And he looked rather sheepish, but he didn't need to, because I was the one who should look sheepish, because he's really telling us that we have a bit of an identity problem, that we claim that Thorney Island is a dense population, concentration of history, but hardly anybody, apart from those directly involved, has heard of it, including lots of people who actually work there, haven't heard of it at all. So that was why I chose this subject for the talk. Where is Thorney Island? So where is Thorney Island? Right, let's go a quick bit of history. 11,000 years ago, there was no Thorney Island. The melting of the glaciers caused a rise of 15 meters in world sea levels. And it wasn't until before about 4000 BC, when the sea level subsided and fresh water from the Thames, from Oxford, flowed down and met the Tyburn from the Hampstead Hills, and by lots of gyrations, it's formed lots of ayots, or small islands, including Thorney Island. In the 7th century, St. Peter appeared to a fisherman on the other side of the river in stormy weather and asked him to ferry him across the Thames, where he consecrated the new abbey, and with bright light suddenly appearing. And afterwards he gave the fisherman a huge catch of fish to make up for this. There's no archaeological evidence to support this, but every year the worshipful company of fishmongers gives a present of fish. It's usually, I think, salmon, to Westminster Abbey in memorial and in memory of what might have happened with St. Peter in the 7th century. The first actual reference to Thorney Island is in 785. Offa's Charter speaks of St. Peter and the people of the Lord dwelling in Thornea, Thorn Ayot Island, at the awesome place, where in Latin, in loco terribilis. A couple of other dates. 1959, the abbey was founded by St. Dunstan, the original abbey, and the remains of that abbey have been found recently, some more remains. 1016, King Canute, King of England, was probably the first king to build a palace at Westminster, but people are still arguing about that. And of course, if he was, then it could be that the tide of the Thames was where he put his throne to prove to his courtiers that he couldn't hold back the waves, but we don't know yet. In 1050, it was refounded by Edward the Confessor, though he was too ill to attend the opening. And that's really all the main part, apart from in 1352, the House of Commons first met in the Chapter House, and also the refectory and the Painted Chamber. We'll come to that in a moment. And then in 1512, fire gutted the royal residence soon after Henry VIII came to the throne, ending 450 years of a royal palace. He then acquired Cardinal Wolsey's York Place. Okay, where is Thorney Island? This is the glamorized version of Thorney Island that we use on our website. It's a beautiful picture. and it's not completely accurate. It was never quite as nicely formulated as that. And in Edward the Confessor's time, there wasn't any water coming down here. I don't know if you can see this cursor, but I'll occasionally be using this. But otherwise, it's amazing how everything is still there. The Abbey is still there. It's not looking like it does there. It hasn't got the Hawksmoor's towers at the front, and it's been virtually the whole of the outside of the Abbey has been restoned since then, but it is still there. Westminster Hall, part of the original medieval setup, is still there, as is the Jewel Tower. That's again original medieval, and that was where the Royal Palace was. Around here was the Royal Palace, and this was the garden of the Abbey, claimed to be the most continuously cultivated garden in the whole country. Westminster Hall I've mentioned. Westminster Hall was also where the judiciaries met, all the courts met until comparatively recently. And of course there's Westminster School, which had it started off as a charity, and it has created an enormous number of successful people. So that is the really dense concentration, all of which is still there, apart from the Royal Palace, which has gone. So as we're going to walk around here, and then we're going to walk a bit further around the wider aspects of it, which I'll tell you in a minute. But I'll first of all mention 3 gatehouses. This is the gatehouse to the south, if you can see my cursor. So there was water there and a bridge. We know that they've excavated parts of that bridge, so we know that was there. On the west side, the gatehouse that was also a prison, facing towards Tothill Street. Victoria Street hadn't been built then. And then the northern gate, just here, which goes on to today's Whitehall, then called King Street. So anyway, that's the general outline of it all. That's what down here, you can see that's what we were looking at before, the old Thorney Island. This is its context. Here is the River Tyburn, which comes down from the Hampstead Hills, down through Mayfair and Green Park, and just round about Buckingham Palace. It bifurcates this part here, which you can follow with my cursor going sort of west, goes right down to just beyond Vauxhall Bridge. This is the Tyburn River, and I say it bifurcates. This part goes to Vauxhall Bridge. This part comes down to the old classic Thorney Island, and there it bifurcates. One part goes around here to Thorney Stairs, which we'll come across, which goes into the Thames. This is down Great College Street, just around the old classic Thorney Island. And from the quality of the society, we govern, as far as planning applications go, we cover this whole area here, and St James's Park we have an interest in. This is looking we looked at the last one was looking across the road from today's Abbey. This is going back quite a bit to see those shops that were there. After that, then these were built. There's the Martyrs Memorial to the pupils who from Westminster School who got killed or injured in the Crimea War, and that is where the gatehouse, the gatehouse that goes towards Tothill Street, that's where that was situated. Now here we have the Westminster Palace Hotel, which is the largest, and they have nearly 1,000 rooms, and the first one in the town to have lifts. And from there, lots of things happening. It housed the Indian office for a while, and from there, Gandhi had a correspondence with Tolstoy, which is rather unusual. Now, if you look at it, you can probably just see it's about 5 or 6 stories high. It looks huge compared with this in the background here, this building here, but that is just an illusion. We'll come to that in a second. On the right is the Royal Aquarium, which I'm giving a separate talk on if we can make it work in a month or two's time. So I'll leave that for the moment. Now this little building here is actually this one. It's Queen Mary's Mansions. You can see how ginormous it is compared with everything around it. Most buildings were just about 6 stories high. This one was 12 or 14 stories high, and it was built without planning permission by a rogue city entrepreneur. They thought for a long time, should they demolish it? And they thought they can't do it. The fire people said, you can't get our ladders up there. If there's a fire, there's no chance. So in the end, they didn't order him to pull it down. but it did affect planning regulations. As a result of this, the law was changed so that buildings couldn't go higher than first 80 feet, then 60 feet. So that changed for a long time until fairly recently, when of course it's all gone completely different. This is the Royal Aquarium, which is, as I say, the subject of another talk. So I'll leave that for the moment. This is Storey's Gate. Now that's just giving you a rough idea of where here's a vineyard, which you can see in Orchard Street. It's in the Peabody buildings with the Abbey Vineyard there. There's also one near the river, and at least one in St James's Park. And that's Storey's Gate. It was called Long Ditch. And this is Thieving Lane, not called Thieving Lane because there were thieves in it, but it's because thieves, when they went to the Gatehouse prison, which was just here, they were taken down this road, which was outside the city walls, so they couldn't escape into the sanctuary. If they got inside the walls, then they were free from arrest. There's not even Cardinal Wolsey could go in there, and so that is one of the reasons why the place we'll come to later became so notorious, one of the worst places in the whole of London, because it had a tradition of criminality, because those who went into the sanctuary and those who didn't, they went outside. Okay, the next one I think is this one. That is this is just this is the gate that went northwards, and there's actually a little statue of a church. You won't be able to see it, but where Churchill statue now is in Parliament Square, that is where the North Gate was going up. This is a good example. This is the gatehouse that is looking down onto Tothill Street, next door to where Victoria Street is now, and it was a prison, both a civil and a religious prison. Lots of people were imprisoned there in their lifetimes, including Samuel Pepys. But there are two poems that are associated with this, and I'll read them out. They're very short. One is from Richard Lovelace, and this is quite a famous one. Stone walls do not a prison make, nor iron bars a cage. Minds innocent and quiet, take that for an hermitage. If I have freedom in my love, and in my soul am free, angels alone that soar above enjoy such liberty. That's Richard Lovelace. He was in for a fairly minor political offence. He was released. The next person didn't. He was executed the next day after he wrote this poem. Sir Walter Raleigh. This is the end of it. Who in the dark and silent grave, when we have wandered all our ways, shuts up the story of our days? But from this earth, this grave, this dust, my God shall raise me up, I trust. Well, he didn't, and Walter Raleigh was executed round the corner in the old palace yard, but then buried in St Margaret's Church, which was a prestigious place to be buried. So it's always been a bit of a puzzle to me why he's executed for treason, then is buried in St Margaret's. Right, I'm going to attempt to move on to the next one. It has. This is the bell tower, which is on the it's much bigger than this. It's 75 feet long, and it had bells on top of it. So this is must have been during the later stages. It eventually became a pub, but that was where people were seeking sanctuary would go. There was a chapel, in fact, two chapels in there, and so they wanted to stay the night there. They would go there. Now this is the back of the Supreme Court. That was on the site of the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court, the fount of all justice, has at the back of it this stone doorway. It doesn't belong to it. It comes from Tothill Fields Prison, which was the other end of Victoria Street, behind the Army and Navy stores, where the Greencoat Boy pub now is. And that was the entrance to that prison. For some reason or other, they brought it here, and I'm not sure why. You can see it in the old sanctuary. Now we come to the front of the abbey. That's where the shop is, and as you can see my cursor just above there, there's one room going to there, and there's a pillar there, another longer one going there. This was the Jerusalem chamber. We're going to first one and then the other. Jerusalem chamber, and that is more or less as it is now. It doesn't look quite as good as that, and that's more or less as it was. It hasn't changed much over the years. It has a lot of history. The most of the King James Bible was actually written here. It's written by committee, an amazing book to have been written by committee, because it's written to be one of the most influential books ever, and the way it traveled the world, and particularly to America. Now, the other interesting thing about this is where Henry IV was on his way to Jerusalem, the real Jerusalem, because it had been prophesied that he would die in Jerusalem. But on his way, he stopped off at Edward the Confessor's tomb to say some prayers, went ill, very ill suddenly, and was brought into this room and right in front of the fire there. And what happened next is probably better described by Shakespeare than me, from Henry IV. It hath been prophesied by me to me for many years, I should not die but in Jerusalem, which vainly I supposed the Holy Land. But bear me to that chamber, there I'll lie, in that Jerusalem shall Harry die. And he died in this Jerusalem. In Shakespeare's play, Henry V comes into the room, sees his father dead, and puts on his crown, and then Henry IV wakes. But that's just Shakespeare's take on it. So that's the Jerusalem chamber. And next door is this hallway, and it's used most of the time by pupils of Westminster School for their meals. And at the end of term time, it reverts to the dean and chapter because it belongs to the dean. So it's not open for public view. Though it's part of what was known as Cheney Gates, that the dean's private residence, which is reckoned to be the oldest residence in continuous occupation in London. And it was here that Queen Elizabeth I, who's one of the founders of the school, once a year would come to hear the pupils giving a play in Latin. So it's got quite a lot of history, this play. And also Elizabeth Woodville, who was the wife of Edward IV, when Richard III was seeking her out, she sought refuge here, and she was given sanctuary with her son. But one of the dukes and the archbishop came to persuade her that the sanctuary wasn't meant for children. In any case, he'd be in very good care if they took him to the Tower, which they did. And he was, of course, one of the princes in the Tower who was murdered. You go around the corner from the edge of from the shop, and this is the first glimpse of St Margaret's Church. It's a beautiful church. It suffers from the fact that it's right next door to the Abbey, as if it's almost a changeling child that's been left there. But it's a very historic church in its own right. And we're looking now at the burial ground, where people like William Caxton, the printer who had printing works nearby, was buried. Wenceslaus Holar, the great engraver, was also buried there. And also the largest number of regicides anywhere, that those who killed King Charles I are buried here. They were first they were taken out by Cromwell and put into Westminster Abbey, but then later taken out and put here. Now we're now going to move round to the left and then go round by the side of St Margaret's Church, and we've come to this big plane tree and this grave, which is hardly ever noticed by people passing by. I didn't see it for decades, and it's the only tomb above ground, like I think anywhere in centre of London, and it's the grave of Alexander Davies, who was a scrivener who had a daughter, Mary Davies. He died aged 29, leaving a 3-month-old child, Mary Davies, who was brought up and eventually betrothed to Sir Thomas Grosvenor, a little known baronet from the north of England. When they got married, of course, she brought with her a lot of land that was thought to be worthless, but hundreds of acres, which are now Mayfair and Belgravia. and all that land is still with the Grosvenors, that they've kept nearly all of it over all the centuries. So we're now going to walk further down to the end and then turn right on the side of St. Margaret's Church. And up there you'll see on the side of the church, you'll see an effigy of King Charles I. It was found in a junkyard in Fulham in the end of the 1940s and presented in the 1950s by the Society for the Martyrdom of King Charles I. There's a society that wants Charles I declared a martyr. And once a year they have a procession from the Mall that comes up here. And I watched it one day, and it's very impressive because they're all dressed in contemporary dress, and they come up to pay their respects. Now, what is he looking at? He's looking across the road towards Westminster Hall. He's looking at Oliver Cromwell, who of course executed him, having a kind of a mythological scaring match. Now, we also know that Trafalgar Square, going up towards Trafalgar Square up Whitehall, there's an effigy of King Charles I, a statue on a horse, the biggest equestrian statue in London, and he's looking down both at where he was executed in the banqueting hall and at the statue of Cromwell. So Cromwell has been looked at both angles by King Charles I. So it's civil wars don't end; they just change their tactics. Now we walk along a little along the road, and we come to opposite Westminster Hall. This is the chapter house where it's the first Parliaments happens. A beautiful building, and it's best seen in the winter when there aren't too many leaves of the trees obscuring it. And that is where it was used. It's where the monks used to do their daily business and say their prayers, and eventually became the place for the first Parliament. And if we go behind, we're now going in the cloister of Westminster Abbey, one of the cloisters, and there you can see the chapter house behind. There's a wall here. Behind there's another wall. That is the wall of part of Westminster School that's peeping up behind. And if we look at it from another angle, if you go into the cellarium of the Abbey, which is a great place to go to, where you can have a coffee and drink and all that, you go upstairs and look out of the window, you'll see the other side of this wall. And that is the surviving wall, the original monks' refectory, which was one of the early places where Parliament sat, the chapter house here and the painted chamber across the road. So it's amazing that that is still there, and you can see it from a window in the cellarium. Across the road is the famous Westminster Hall. It still claims to have the biggest hammer beam roof in the world. And there are lots of scenes of interest have been there. Of course, King Charles I trial, Warren Hastings, and lots and lots. It also had a lot of the judiciary, a lot of the courts were in here as well. But what interests me particularly about this is that in the early 1900s, they needed to repair some of the oak beams, and they didn't know where to get them. Ireland offered some, and Australia offered some, but then up popped George Courthope, who said that his family estate in Sussex had supplied the original beams, and he'd be very happy to do that again, which he did. So that was great. Then he eventually became a junior minister, Sir George, and an MP, and he revealed another fascinating fact during a debate on the Forestry Commission. He said, "It may interest honourable members to know that a number of the oak trees which I felled for the restoration of Westminster Hall had over 600 annual rings. That is, they were over 600 years old. And it is safe to assume that the great beams which they were replacing in Westminster Hall must have been at least of a similar age." In other words, those were still growing. The ones that were replacing the beams were still growing 600 years ago when the original beams were put in to Westminster, into Westminster Hall. I find that a really fascinating fact. A bit further on is St. Stephen's Chapel, which was originally run by the monks, Benedictine monks. It's now the entrance to Parliament. For many years, 100 years, it was where Parliament actually sat. and they sat. They had benches on one side and benches on the other, just as the monks did, so they're facing each other. And that is why we have opposition benches, opposite government benches, whereas in other countries they have them in circular patterns, and that may have given more antagonism to events in our parliament as opposed to others. But that's still a very historic building. But not historic. Underneath here, there is St Mary Undercroft, not open to the public. Beautiful building. It once held Cromwell's horses when he took it over, but that's a very historic building. It's now about to be repaired. It's used by MPs, have privilege to use it, but that's a really historic and old building just underneath. Now, come across the road to the Jewel Tower. You can see Westminster Abbey in the background. And it's just, as I say, immediately opposite to Westminster Hall. The Jewel Tower was erected by Edward III to house the jewels, and it was also part of the old royal palace. And so, in front of there was the gardens in which the King and Queen would have their leisure. Here you can see a bit of a wall. That used to come out. If we look at the poster that there's a very nice poster that the Jewel Tower does. There you can see this is the wall that would have come out from that. So this is what it would have looked like when the King and Queen had their little private garden there. It's the Jewel Tower, when there's no lockdown, has tables and chairs outside. It's a very nice place to have a cup of coffee. After it finishes the Jewel Tower, it was then used to house royal documents. Until they were moved to Victoria Tower. Then it became a place where measurements were measured, feet, inches, pints of beer, and that lasted until the building of Lambeth Bridge, when the vibrations from the bridge and the traffic meant they could no longer guarantee the accuracy of the thing. But that's the Jewel Tower, and it's one of the original things that's from the medieval palace, which are still there. And there's as you can see my cursor, there's the Jewel Tower. Then we're moving down here towards Great College Street. Now this is the original medieval wall. And this is where MPs are often, on College Green, are often interviewed. You'll recognise it from that. The other side of the wall is the Monk's Garden, which I said is the longest, is claimed to be the longest continuously cultivated garden in the country. And you can go into it for most days, not every day, but most days of the week. You can go in there, and you can. It's a wonderful place of peace and calm. You're right in the middle of London. You can see the Abbey, you can see the Houses of Parliament, and it's very quiet. You've got mulberry trees, black and white mulberry trees, and lots of other trees to there. And it's really a very interesting place. So now we're going to walk further down, turn right up Great College Street. We was coming just here, and there's Great College Street. And as you can see here, that says the slaughterhouse. Why they had a slaughterhouse there, I don't know. And then the mill, M-Y-L-L. And that, of course, is the mill of Mill Bank. The monks had a mill there, and that's how that all came about. There's the old palace. So we're now going to walk up Great College Street. Just there's an entrance to Dean's Yard. And they've done excavations there, and they found there was actually a bridge over the Tyburn, which would have come down here. Now it's canalised, and it's now part of the sewer system. So if we go up to the end of there's a Great College Street, the same wall we saw coming around, going up to the end. And we're now going to pop it up to there. And there, this is again on a Thorney Island visit to Church House. They let us go downstairs. And this is part of the original gatehouse. Is actually downstairs. That gatehouse that we saw in the original picture is still, parts of it are still there from that. Now, here's a big jump. We're now just here in the Dean's Yard. We're going to go with this arrow, but as the crow flies, it can't be more than 100 yards. You'd normally go around by the road. And it is a huge jump from the glory and the power and the religion of Whitehall to the worst slum in the whole of London, which Charles Dickens called Devil's Acre. This is Old Pie Street, and this is St Anne's Lane there, where the Thorney Island archive is, just there. So let's go and have a look at it. That's a photograph of it looking down towards our archive. It's actually 1892, so it was sometime after they'd sort of got rid of the slums. But the building itself must have been roughly what the slum looked like, because it doesn't look like a building that was recently built. Up here it says lodgings for single people or something. But it looks almost like a Provençal. It's got shutters and everything. It doesn't look too bad at all. And where this rectangle is here, that just there is where St Andrew's Youth Club is today. That's claims to be the oldest youth club in the world, and no one has counterclaimed that. And opposite, on the other side of the narrow lane, is our current our office, the Thorney Island Archive. This is the same building, a painting looking back the other way to where we came from, and you can see it's very, very similar. And this is where the entrance to our archive is now. Now, just here was where Henry Purcell, one of England's greatest composers, he still is, lived. It's not been absolutely nailed, but it's pretty certain it is. If you look at this, comes from an earlier map. It says here that 3 ancient houses in Westminster, on the right hand of which Henry Purcell was born. That'll be just here in 1658, past his life. And if we look back, and if you look at this, the shape of that and the windows, and you can see they're exactly the same windows and that. So it's the same building. So that we think is almost certainly where Henry Purcell lived for much of his life. That gives you an indication of what the actual slums used to look like. This is after the restoration, because that building there with William Gibbs, the first of them, even predated the later charitable houses, Peabody Estates. But you can see how rough the houses were. This again is they're already starting to renovate it, but that gives you a much better idea of what the slums look like. Now this here is where the entrance to our archive now is, and it looks very similar on a kind of slant to the corner. This is the second generation. The Thorney, in Duck Street, there was a pub called the 1 Ton, which became a pickpocket, a school, literally a school for pickpockets and for thieving, because half the people who lived in were so poor that thieving was one of their biggest occupations. Now, this was before the Peabody Estate, but when the Peabody Estates were by George Peabody, they were a very good idea. They got a lot of people out of slums, but they were only available to people who had who had earned a certain amount of money. A lot of the people there couldn't do that. And as the Peabody buildings were built, they're much nicer and much roomier. They displaced more people more poor people from there, and who had nowhere else to go. They either hung around or went south of the river. And because of that, the philanthropists who converted the 1 Ton pub into something like a mini school. They built this, which is called the Westminster Working Men's Club and Reading Room, and that didn't charge, and it gave a lot of poor people, a huge amount of room to start to relax and drink, and I think there were obviously places you could stay as well. But it's a bit romanticized because this is our St Anne's Lane, which is very narrow, and it doesn't look like it from where we are. This is the inside, brief look inside our archive. This is the book side. There are lots of engravings. If you're worried what this thick thing is, it's not an Argos catalogue. It's the Army and Navy's 1907 catalogue. It's huge and densely packed products in 1907. Now, this is what it looks like today. There's the St Andrews on the right and our archive on the left and our archive on the right. That's the entrance to it. Now, what was it like then? So look at this, what it is now. This is Charles Dickens, who first popularized the phrase Devil's Acre, which is what it was called in the first edition of Household Words. He described the area as the dingiest collection of shabby buildings ever squeezed together in a rank corner as a club for tomcats, and added, the blackest type of moral turpitude that flows in the capital rolls its filthy wavelets up to the very walls of Westminster Abbey. And that was, as we've seen, the slums went almost to the Abbey itself. Cardinal Wiseman of Westminster Cathedral also referred to nests of ignorance, vice, depravity and crime, squalor, wretched haunts of filth, which no sewage commission can reach. He was the first person to mention the word slum in modern literature. So we're now imagine we're taking a stroll down what looks like this very ordinary St Anne's Lane, while I read out some contemporary references. There was horrid overcrowding, as many as 12 people to one room, and with half the population engaged in thieving, according to contemporary reports, and a no-go area for the police. There's one story of 40 policemen were refused entry by the people living there. John Hollingshead, in his book Ragged London, says this: enter a narrow street, here we are, St Anne's Lane, glance at a fearful side place called St Anne's Court, and wonder if ever such filth and squalor can be exceeded. The court had every feature of a sewer, and a long puddle of filth soaked in a hollow centre. Many of the flowers have no flooring in their passages, and there is nothing for the barefooted children to stand upon but the black, damp, uneven earth. A child, dirty and half naked, was hanging out of one of the old-fashioned casement windows, and in the summertime, it's no unusual thing to see about 50 coarse women exhibiting themselves in the same manner. The 1861 census, that's after the improvements have started, for Old Pie Street, that's the street in front of you see before you go down the lane, shows a single lodging house was home to over 120 people. And that's partly because Peabody estates were pushing people out, but that's quite a horrific statistic, especially if the houses were the size that we've just seen. One final excerpt from the parish magazine, from the parish book on the Devil's Acre. During the cholera epidemic of 1848, a medical gentleman was called to visit a sufferer in one of the streets in which the church abuts. While stooping over the poor creature to administer medicine, his coat pockets were emptied of the contents by the dying woman's husband. How can that happen? And then it goes on, when the church was built, at the first services in the new church, and that is presumably St Matthew's at the end there, the inhabitants of the courts mustered in force to interrupt the worship by the beating of empty barrels, the breaking of windows and other disorderly conduct. They also stole stack pipes, iron gratings. The scripture reader was assaulted and nearly killed. That was Devil's Acre. So let's move on. We'll go down the end of the road to the end, and then we'd come to this, the Gas, Light and Coke Company, 1813 to 1937, site of a gasworks which provided the first public supply of gas in the world. Now, this occupied the whole of the block from Great Peter Street to Horseferry Road. There we can see, we just come down here from down St Anne's Lane, and here, there's where the plaque was. I mean, it's going down what is today Monk Street, Holland Street, the gasworks. And look, there's a big gasometer there, and these look like small gasometers there, and more all the way down there. So the whole block was turned over to the gasworks, and as I say, the first in the world. It kind of been a very pleasant place to work. That's what it looks like now. It's a betting shop. Why not? That's what happens. And there's one of the adverts for it. It says, elegant and simplicity and warm as ecstasy. William Cooper, the poet. That's what the front looked like. Pretty solid building. It was started by a German, and he was responsible for why there were so many gas lights in in the area, and there still are. There's still hundreds of gas lights in St James's Park and surrounding roads, all dating back to this time. Now that's the gasworks. Opposite the gasworks is pianoforte manufactory, and this was the biggest pianos were very popular. London was a centre of piano making, mainly in Islington, but this one was the biggest in London. It was the biggest in England. It actually was the biggest piano manufacturing facility in the world. So you've got opposite each other two world pioneering firsts, which is really quite extraordinary. It was Beethoven's pride and joy, and he thought of it, quotes, this is his piano, as an altar on which I will place the choicest offerings of my mind to the divine Apollo. Whether he got a free piano for that or it was spontaneous, I don't know. It was also a favourite of Mozart and Chopin. Liszt played on that piano on his last visit to London. So that's a picture of Broadwood in action. And they're the actual pianos we made, 2,500 a year they were making. They look as though they're mainly grand pianos. It still exists now, but of course they're made abroad. The Broadwood still exists, and it's got an office in London, but it's really abroad. Incidentally, the piano manufacturing company is on the site of the Department of Transport, today's Department of Transport. Okay, so we've now gone down here. There's the gasworks, and we're now moving past the piano factory and going past the Thorns Brewery, occupying the whole of the rest of Horseferry Road. And we turn right, and we'll now go a little bit along Millbank. That's the penitentiary, which was built on the site of the Tate Gallery today. But before we go there, we're going to get down now. You know what Millbank looks like. And a bit further on, before you come to the Tate Gallery, there's the Thorney Stair. These are Thorney Stairs. Just opposite, on the other side of the road is Thorney Street, where Burberry's have their head office, and that's where one of the tributaries of one of the branches of the Tyburn, you may remember it from the map, the one that coming down to the old Thorney Island branched off, and this is where it came out. And you can see from here, there's still an outlet. Most of the Tyburn now and the sewage is intercepted by an interceptor big pipe, which takes it down to the east end. But when there's too much, when it's flooding and it overflows, then still today, then that you will see water coming out of there, not very pleasant water. But that will all change, hopefully, with the huge, great project they've got on to change, to build a new. Now we're walking on towards the Tate Gallery and the Millbank Penitentiary. On our right here is Peterborough House, a rather impressive place. And that was built for the Earl of Peterborough, possibly on the land by Alexander Davies, whom we've met before. It was then bought over by the Grosvenors, and it became the Grosvenors' central house in London until they moved to Grosvenor Square, which they of course also owned. But rather a nice and interesting place, and you can see the way there's no embankment. It almost looks like chalk there going down to the river with sheep in attendance. Now this is the Tate Gallery, or the old penitentiary. It was going to be designed by Jeremy Bentham along his principles of a panopticon, which was meant to kind of circular thing with levers sticking out, and one warder in the middle of all this could see every cell, but they couldn't see him. So they reckon that one warder could look after the whole of the prison. It was never actually built like that, but there are elements of Jeremy Bentham's principles which are involved in it. You can see there's a lot of brickwork here. And there's a Gloucester to Cirencester coach, but that now is where the Tate Gallery is. And if you go behind to the Millbank Estate, which is one of a number of pioneering social estates that were built in Westminster years and years ago. And this was built partly, if not mainly, with bricks from the Millbank Penitentiary. And I sometimes have difficulty, like these lovely red bricks, and think, were they really taken from there? These look more like the bottom of the penitentiary, but apparently it is the case that it was built with bricks from the penitentiary. And this is the only remaining bit of it, the end of the prison, and that's still there today. You can see the Millbank estate, part of it there. Across the road from Millbank, you can still see this great stone post, which has on it, commemorates the fact that this was where prisoners from the Millbank prison were transported. The prison went through various stages, and after a while it became a staging post for transporting prisoners and to America, mainly Australia. And it is thought that Poms may have come from prisoner of Millbank. There are lots of other claimants for why we're called Poms, but prisoner of Millbank sounds as good as any. And across the road, back on the same site as the Tate Gallery, very close to it, is the Morpeth Arms pub. And underneath that, still to this day, you can see some of the cells of the old prison. These are possibly where they were in transit before they were transported, because it looks like there's a blocked up exit that could be the one that went across to the river and to the ships. Now we move on down the river to if you can remember from that original map of the river, which was very small, unfortunately, that part of it, the main part of the Tyburn went from round about Buckingham Palace westwards right to just beyond Vauxhall Bridge, and that's where we are here. Now this is the main route of the Tyburn, which archaeologists are mainly agreed that must have been where the main Tyburn went, and they can now do extraordinary things with all the boreholes that they put in. The archaeologists, they can tell from thousands of years ago where the channels in the topology would have been, so that water could come down. And so, whereas there's still a lot of discussion about the rest of when the Tyburn came down to the old Thorney Island that we showed you, was it really a river? One senior archaeologist thinks that it was actually a channel that was made by the monks, so they got water for their toilets, and that seems quite likely. So that the actual Tyburn from Buckingham Palace towards the river and Tothill Street could have been more like a delta with lots of small islands and changing. There was a thing called Thorney Island, but to what extent it was Thames water or water from this delta is still being debated. But anyway, this is the exit, and this is the one that goes back up to Buckingham Palace. It's a big exit for a storm pipe when there's excessive water, and it had a sluice house there that a permanent person was there to guard it, and it was said so as that too much muck didn't go back up to Buckingham Palace from the river. But it's called the Tyburn House, and there it is, Rio Cottage, built 1838. The King's School Sluice. That's what the sewer channel was called. Sewers in those days didn't necessarily mean dirty muck, but it was just an outlet, and that is the Rio Cottage. Now we're now coming back up Tatchbrook Street. We come again to another one of the pioneering houses, social housing, Lillington Gardens, which there were a whole number of them around here, which is not happening so much these days. Why is this here? Because this was one of the places where a fort was built during Oliver Cromwell's tenure, because there were fears that King Charles, who was based in Oxford, could invade London at any time to reclaim his crown. And this is a map of all the forts which ringed London. It's 3 times as big as the old London Wall. which is still, you can still see remnants of big remnants. Here you can't see anything, it's all disappeared. All we've got is this map here, and you can see Southampton Fort. That was where the Earl of Southampton's house was, Sergeant's Field, and coming down to, going over to Vauxhall Port there. So it went over the river, and here Tot Hill Fort, that was the fort that was built where that, roughly where Lillington Gardens was there. And that's that it was built by people with picks and shovels, just shoveling dirt up, and then they had, the forts were in between, but the whole thing was a ring around London in order to keep out King Charles's supposed army. Right, we're almost at the end now. There's Lillington Gardens. Now, if you go up Vauxhall Bridge Road, down, there's a turning to Francis Street, that's going to the right, there up here, and that leads to the back end of Westminster Cathedral and Francis Street. Up here is King's Scholar Passage. That's the name that's given to both the old river and to the sewer. So the sewer and the Tyburn are mixed, and they come down here, and you can see there's a patch that's been cut open. This is because they had to dig it up to make some changes to the sewer. And when I was passing by there, I managed to persuade them to let me go through the wooden fence they had, and this is what it looked like, that underneath that patch. And you can see how well it was made from Victor. Those bricks are very, very solid. There's 3, if not 4 layers of brick going right the way across, and underneath here is the Tyburn going down to the Thames from where it bifurcated by Buckingham Palace. Now we're going up King's Scholars Passage to, this is Victoria Street's up here. This is the Victoria Palace Theatre, and this is when they were doing all the recent changes to the station. And if you could see carefully just here, can you see the cursor going up and down? That is the Tyburn plus the sewer. That they had to divert it slightly, but that is actually a picture of the actual Tyburn, which is pretty rare. And that was when they were building the station. So if you go down those steps by Victoria Station on the Victoria Street entrance, you go down some stairs, and you're going under the Tyburn when you go down those stairs. And that's it. You can see it's slightly better, but it's still a bit blurred there. Well, I'm sorry about the earlier interruptions, which we missed out a bit, but that's basically the end of the journey. We've walked right around, but I'm very happy to try to answer any questions or things that might have been missed on the process.
Well, that's brilliant, Victor. Before I hand you over to Jules, I noticed that we maybe you've given the Prime Minister a tour of Thorney Island, because you've mentioned world beating in terms of pianoforte and light and coke, whereas I feel many of our other world beating issues have somehow gone astray. And you also talk about the area being disreputable and school for thieves and filth and squalor and coarse women exhibiting themselves. And I do like to disassociate Thorney Island society from those remarks. Brilliant, Victor, thank you. And Jules, I'll hand over to you now for the questions.
Okay, well, I was just wondering myself, what was the name of the piano manufacturers? Did I miss that?
Broadwood. Broadwood. He's a Scot who came down and it's still going to, I say, it's still going today, but not in the same way, because all the manufacturing's gone abroad. But he was in association, I think, with an Indian, but he built it up, and it's really, I still find it quite amazing that that's these two places were beating in Horseferry Road, which is not very industrial these days.
No, absolutely not. I think people have been saving up their questions. Would anybody like to ask something? Unmute yourself and do ask Victor.
Jules, it's Mark.
Oh, okay, Mark.
From St James's Park. First of all, can I say to Sue, Don't apologise for the dubious reputation of the Thorney Islands, because St James's Park had the same dubious reputation many years ago, and I'm delighted that we are both associated with each other in the same way. But Victor, what a fascinating talk, and you have told me so much about Thorney Island, which I have been trying to learn for myself of a year of walk downs at weekends and evenings, but my goodness, how fascinating it is. So this is a bit of a fanciful question for you. If there was one artifact or one building or one structure that you would like to see returned, which would it be?
Well, I suppose it might be the Royal Aquarium, which I haven't talked about, which I'm going to talk about later, because that was a huge loss. But otherwise, I'm going to ask you, Mark, this one while I'm thinking. But things have actually disappeared, because a lot of it still is still there. But it would have been really nice to have the old the Houses of Parliament would have been terrific to have. So then it would have been all over one. And the Tyburn, why can't we have the real Tyburn, not mixed with a sewer? Because it's still going down there. Yeah, I'd say if I had one thing to be returned, it would be the Tyburn.
And of course, I did share with you a photograph of what we felt was a Tyburn uncovered in Green Park a few years ago. But seeing as you asked a question, for me, as a placemaker, I think I would have liked to see one of the gate towers replaced, maybe the one at the end of Tothill Street.
Yes, that would be good, wouldn't it? As a prison, Mark, or just as a decoration?
For all those people who seem to be using the park against government advice at the moment. But I won't go any further than that. But absolutely fascinating, Victor. Thank you. Really appreciated it.
Okay, well, Andrew Jones, would you like to chip in?
Unmute.
Okay, Andrew, are you?
I'm back. Can you hear me now?
Yes,
Yes,
of course.
Yeah, sorry. A wonderful talk, Victor. Thank you very much. My question was just about when the river was covered over. Was it, at what point? Presumably the 19th century, was it?
Yeah, it was probably earlier than then. I mean, the other rivers, were all covered over much earlier. The Fleet was, Wren at the time covered it up. I think they didn't like having, especially because there was sewage coming down, natural sewage coming down. They covered them over, quite. I couldn't say exactly when, but they did quite early. But it is seeing all this, it does make you wonder doubly at the achievement of Bazalgette to have all those sewers. We saw a glimpse of one, how big it is compared with ordinary pipes, and did that for the whole of London. It was just an amazing achievement. Even we almost forgive him for not keeping the Tyburn separate. Of course, when they put sewers in, they would put them in some distance from the original Tyburn and then divert it in. They couldn't build it on the actual river. So that across St James's Park, there are the original river wouldn't have followed what looks like the line of the sewer. Because there are a lot. I think. Are you there, Mark? I presume that the drain pipes are going down from the gates at the top of Green Park. That's the sewer. They follow the sewers, I presume. No, you're not there. Okay.
No, I am here, but I'm sorry, I'm just trying to follow you.
Yeah.
The bit of the Tyburn that we know that we uncovered went straight under Buckingham Palace, and I think that's the bit you mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
And it comes out Buckingham Palace Road, which is interfering with some gates they're about to install. The pipes that come down towards the east of Canada Gate now go underneath the Mall, and there's an interceptor, and they will actually drain into the lake. So all the groundwater goes into the lake. But we then also have the King's Collar sewer, that comes in just below Spencer House and cuts across Green Park as well.
No, I was thinking of the drain manhole covers that go from the north of Green Park, roughly where the old gates are, and the regular intervals they go down to Buckingham Palace, and I presume they're on top of the sewer. Would that be right?
I can't answer it at the moment, but I will check our historical maps and let you know.
Yeah, that'd be really, really good, because I think the actual Tyburn itself was a little way away. In fact, they've been doing some archaeological work north of Green Park recently, and I think that's.
Yes, the Tyburn is to the east of that, of where we're talking about.
Yeah.
Okay, lovely. Anybody else like to ask Victor anything?
Observations?
Does the Thames Tideway tunnel change how what's left of the Tyburn will drain? You know, is it kind of reorganizing all of that?
I presume that the main effect will be that you'll no longer get sewage coming out when the interceptor can't work, and so that will, in some sense, clean up the Tyburn a bit. But no, it'll still, the Tyburn will go down, will go through that with all the sewage. But the Thames itself will be the beneficiary, because nowadays occasionally they have to empty sewage into the Thames, not as on the scale they used to, but it's still obviously not a very nice thing to happen.
Yeah. Thanks.
Victor, one can't help thinking the proximity of the monks and ecclesiastical with the poor of the area. One hopes there was a lot more philanthropy that was given from the clergy to the poor people in the slums. Yes,
well, there was an almonry which is just outside the main gates. It was on one of those maps that you couldn't see. Sorry about that, but that's where roughly where what part of Caxton's works were. But that was the alm. They gave alms every day to the poor. But I'm not aware from reading that they had a big effort on Devil's Acre. That was left to philanthropists. Unfortunately, there were some around. But I don't think the monks probably thought they'd done their bit by dealing out money through the almonry. Two people.
Got a question. Stuart Marshall would like to ask a question.
Thank you. You said at the beginning that Thorney was mentioned in the charter, Offa's charter, which seemed to predate the Abbey, unless I've got that wrong, because if you said the Abbey was founded about 950, well, Offa was quite considerably before that. So what was the context of Offa's charter in which Thorney was mentioned? Thank you.
I mean, it wasn't a cathedral or anything, but it's just that happens to be in documents the first time that the word Thornea is come across. And what exactly he was doing, he wasn't building a dike there, presumably, but it's just known. The document is known as that. But I don't know anything more about his presence in Westminster, if indeed it was, or whether he was writing this for some other reason. I'll try and check that out. Actually, that's an interesting point.
So was the charter for a community on that site? It was before the Abbey was founded.
Yeah, because there were lots of different communities. I mean, going right back to thousands of years. I mean, they just a short way down the river by Vauxhall Bridge, there are these amazing posts that come up at very, very low tide. And they're the oldest structure in London, sort of 7,000 years old. And that was a roving community then. And that's very close to the Abbey in Thorney Island. And they have dug out a lot of prehistoric remains as well. It hasn't all fitted into a pattern, but there was life around Thorney Island for quite a long time, often nomadic, but it was there, and Romans, there's a Roman presence as well, and a Saxon presence definitely, because the Saxons probably were building some kind of church in order to serve Londonvic, which was the Saxon bit of London between Trafalgar Square and Fleet Street, where there's a big Saxon trading settlement for many years.
Joanna would like to ask you, Victor, do you know what year the horse ferry stopped operating?
Stopped operating. I don't know. Can I guess? Well, it would have been when the bridges were built. Which bridge I don't know, but whenever the bridge was built, they had to give out compensation, and the horse ferry, as you know, Joanna, other people know the horse ferry, which was the income from which went to the Church of England, Lambeth Palace. That was part of what I think is the most successful monopoly in history. For 600 years, a combination of the Archbishop of Canterbury, the watermen and the City of London stopped a second bridge being built. So there was I think it was 600 years before a second bridge was built after London Bridge, and they had a lot of compensation then. So when the horse ferry, when the nearby bridges to the horse ferry were closed, and it would have to be, I suppose, Westminster probably before. Or maybe it was Lambeth Bridge. Then compensation would have to was paid to because they would have lost a huge amount of income. So my guess is it would be one of those two bridges when they were built.
Thanks, Victor. Thank you. It's really interesting.
A couple more messages on the chat. Stephen asks could you say a bit more about the history of Millbank Prison? He thinks that it was the prison house. Do you think so?
You went mute in the middle of that.
Oh, I'm sorry. Do you think Millbank Prison was mentioned in Bleak House, Dickens?
It's quite possible, but with the sources for Dickens, there are so many. He was such a social reformer as well as everything else. And he knew lots of prisons. I mean, his father was in Marshalsea. He could in there. He knew a lot of the prisons. And he would visit them and try to do things about them. So I think it's probably too big a prison for. He thought it was very strict, the rules there, but who knows? Like Fagin's lair, it's quite possible it was the 1 ton in Thorney in the Devil's Acre, but equally it could be on Saffron Hill, where the actual Fagin's den was located. He has such a memory, but lots of things are based on real life, as we know. So it's possible, but I've not seen any indication that happened from as far as Millbank.
Okay, Joanna says, great talk, thank you, Victor. And she works in Great Minster House today, which was the old Broadwood piano factory. So that's really interesting. Brian says, Civil Service Bar in the Department of the Transport's old Marsham Towers building, 1960s, was a circular building using the foundations of one of the old gas holders.
Oh, really? I didn't know that. Would that have been? I wonder if that's still there. It won't be in the new building, will it? That's fascinating.
Yeah, that would be in the old building, the old Toast Rack building.
Toast Rack, right. I wonder if they kept it. They sometimes do keep these things, but you know that. You'd know, I guess, if it had been.
And Conway says, many thanks for fascinating talk, Vic. It may be of interest that last year he gave a presentation at the Royal Geographical Society, link below, we can forward that to everybody here, featuring Thorney Island at 3 minutes 55 seconds to show how school students and others can use MOLA, geological digital layers in geographical information services to identify such features and London's hidden rivers such as the Tyburn.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, that sounds like that new University of London thing that's come out with you can sit the maps with the layers, and you can just scale across and get. I've got one myself, which is absolutely fascinating. You've got today's map, and then you just scale across, and it goes back 100 years, and 200 years, and 300 years, and it's amazing what you can find out through that. And the Broadwood factory and that's okay. That comes on modern maps. That's on Ordnance Survey maps. But the other ones, it's often the only way you can sort of locate something you read about in a book by going to one of these old maps.
Okay, another question from John. Sorry, another question this time from John. Where could people seek Abbey Sanctuary?
Where could they? It was anywhere within the Abbey and its immediate outworld had a wall around it, and it's anywhere in there. In the places covered now, there's old sanctuaries still exist. 2 roads with the word sanctuary in them. So it's quite a lot of Parliament Square. That wouldn't have that wasn't housed. You have to go to the bell tower to get out of the rain, or else if you were a bit posher, you go into the Dean's, into Cheney Gates. But it was quite a broad area, and it was stopped in James I's reign. But by that time, the culture had already been ingrained. The criminals went there, and they lived nearby, and unfortunately, it was often father to son because they had nothing else to do, and so the culture of thieving just went on for a long time, and as I say, the initial efforts to reform it made it worse, because you were kicking out people. There were 120 people in one house. Wow, and only 10 of those will be in the new building. The others have got to go somewhere.
Yeah, right. Brian says it was built over for the new Home Office building. He doesn't know how much of the foundations actually remain. And Joanna says, a great day when they were all sent home at 10 a.m. because of the gas leak when they were working on the new Home Office building.
Yeah, gas leak from the original gas. Gosh.
Well, I don't know if it's a gas leak, but definitely there was some problem. There were some problems because the old original, the old gasworks. I don't know what it was. I just know we all got sent home and it was brilliant.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
Okay, does anybody have any other questions? Let's see. Okay, Louise says Affinity by Sarah Waters is partly set in Millbank. Okay.
Oh, right. Do you know which Millbank, the prison, or do you mean the prison, Louise?
Yes, the prison.
The prison, right. I didn't know that. Right.
It's a 1999 novel, and it's partly set there.
There. Oh, that's interesting. I don't know about any other novels that are located around. There's no novel of Thorney Island yet. Thorney Island is only mentioned, as far as I know, in on the cover of 2 books. There's one by the Reverend James Ridgway in the 1800s, and just called Thorney Island, and the other is an exhaustive a survey by the Museum of London, which is called it's got Thorney Island in the title. But it's but a lot of work is done. It's one of the most dug places by archaeologists in the country, and there's still parts of it they know there must be things underneath if they can only get to it.
Okay, Jules, is that probably it for questions then?
I think it is, yep.
Okay. Well, I'd like to thank everyone for your participation. Brilliant questions. And to just remind you that we do have another talk coming up on March the 9th, entitled The Plague, which does reference Thorney Island and the plague. So that maybe links in with the literary ambitions that we were perhaps talking about. So thanks for everyone's questions. Brilliant, Victor, thanks so much. May I hope everyone keeps safe, and please become a member of the Thorney Island Society if you haven't. We are all pretty scandalous, depraved, and certainly there are an awful lot of course women involved, but we would love to see you and meet up with you when time is allowed. But anyway, until March the 9th, and thanks again, Victor. Thank you.